A million views on a video about orcas. 2,000 primary school kids hooked on a talk about plankton. Dr. Russell Arnott is a marine biologist, and on top, he's figured out how to make people care about something they think has nothing to do with them.
Is we always preach to the converted. We come from this kind of environmentalist background.
Russell stopped doing that. He built a framework around how different people think, what drives them, and why the same message that works on a marine biologist completely fails on everyone else.
Hands up if you understand all three words on the paper. And 5 people out of 150 put their hand up. And this is within ocean science.
So what does it actually sound like when you get it right? When you take something no one cares about and make it impossible to forget.
The equivalent is like a human going outside and eating a lettuce, and then our skin becoming slightly greener, and then we can just stand outside in the sun and make our own sugar.
That's the plankton. And the reason you need to care about it,
Being able to target your message and understand where these different people are coming from, I think is really, really important. And especially as we're seeing the world is getting much more and more polarized.
this is where the ocean meets Dr. Russell Arnott.
Where the ocean meets.
Russell, I have a bit of a personal question for you. I hope it's not too personal, but can you explain to me who you were as a 7, 8-year-old on the school playground? How would you
Yes.
describe young Russell?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I was really naughty. I had ADHD and I was like the naughty kid. I was quite disruptive without meaning to be disruptive. And I was just always quite surprised that the teachers were always really angry with me. But I think I had this anti-establishment kind of streak as well. Like, so many kids were really into football and I just didn't care. And I was always that guy who like ran on and just booted the ball and like screwed up everyone's football game and then ran away. So yeah, that was me. I guess I was quite curious and quite sensitive as well. Yeah, that was me. Good question.
What were you curious about?
I think I was curious kind of about everything. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I really loved animals, and the weirder the animal, the better. And I grew up in the UAE, and at the time there was no age limits on movies, so you could watch anything sexual was cut, but you could watch anything. And for some reason my parents were like, yeah, that's fine. So I was just like watching all these like amazing horror movies and I originally wanted to get into special effects. So I was just like, and if anything had a cool monster or a really cool alien, I was like, yeah, I was really into that. But yeah, I think I was lucky to grow up like next to the beach. So I spent a lot of time on the beach and like fishing and like with my bodyboard and just enjoying it. And yeah, so I think that's kind of one of the reasons I ended up kind of where I am and doing what I do today.
Yeah, because there's this one theory that I really like is that we don't change much from the person we used to be on the school playground. And we keep so many of these traits. And when you said that you were a naughty boy, how did that realize? You mentioned like kicking off the ball of the
Yeah.
field, being disruptive, but were you very verbal?
As in like, I think basically I'm like, as someone with ADHD, if you put them in a room full of people that they can show off to and then tell them to be quiet, like I was always told off for distracting other people, and that's a thing I still do now. And I really struggle like with academic conferences, like just having to sit there and be spoken at. And I kind of find when I guess there's very rigid social structure in places, like in the classroom, like in a conference. There's like this bit of me that wants to push against it a little bit or challenge, like, why is it like this? And, or not, and, not, I've also been a teacher, so I know what those kids are like when you are a teacher. And it is about just kind of just this isn't a power battle. Just let them show off a little bit, get it out their system, and then they're ready to get on, you know?
Mm. Do, do you remember a teacher that handled you particularly well, that managed to keep that attention on a topic?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I think I my mum was really good at going and speaking to the schools and letting the teachers know how to deal with me. So they were like, I remember one time, and they were like, "We asked Russell to make a robot, and he drew a cyborg," and my mum was like, "So, like, come on, like, just does it really matter? Just let him run with it. He's not being naughty. He's not hurting anyone. He just hasn't done like he's just been doing something slightly different. Just let him run with it." Instead of getting all like, "No, you must draw a robot, not a cyborg." I mean, who cares, you know? So I think some teachers are very rigid, and they're like, I am in charge. You must follow me. And it's like, actually, just pick your battles, you know.
Mm.
So yeah.
Hey, you decided to pick your battles, and what I find interesting when I hear your background is you're curious about a lot of things, but easily distracted, and then still you go down this path of academia,
Mm.
which does require a lot of discipline. How was it for you studying marine biology, basically?
Well, I guess it's interesting because another part of the neurodivergence that is ADHD is the hyperfocus element. So it's like if it's something that you're not interested in, then it's like painful to have to like endure lectures and things like that. But if it's something that you are interested in, then it just is like a switch in your brain that you can just like really hone into it and really kind of do this deep dive. And so that's I guess I've done bits of both. So to an element, a lot of people really hone their research specialism down to these very individual niches, and I've always been a bit more interested in the overlap and what happens if you take content, like my background was in ocean physics, and so what happens if I take ocean physics and move that into the marine ecology or the marine biology spaces. And yeah, so I guess apparently, while we're on the neurodivergent thing, apparently that's a thing that people with ADHD are good at, is they're able to see connections between things that other people don't. I mean,
Mm.
I don't know any different. This is my brain, and that's what I've got to work with, but this is just what people have told me. So
Did you, again, this might be too personal, but did you ever perceive this as a burden?
I guess I that's a really good question. I don't. But I feel like I'm quite lucky in that maybe I don't have it as intensely as I have seen other people. Um, I know that I think I've become more aware of how it affects me, how it affects my behavior, and I think it has really impacted my relationships in the past. I think, yeah, my partners, I think it's not easy dealing with the impulsivity of someone with ADHD. And I'm very lucky I have a partner who is very understanding of my neurodivergence at the moment, and
Mm.
which is so you're not made to feel like there's something wrong with you or you're broken. It's actually just like a part of you, and it's just yeah, there's like fun little workarounds and things like that. So
Mm.
so yeah,
I mean, I for myself can say that this energy that you bring to conversations, into your videos, into your communication, I absolutely love it. And the reason why I was asking is, for so many people, the ocean is a place to calm down, to
mm,
unwind. Would you say the ocean played this role to you as well? Or what relation do you have with the ocean?
mm. Well, I would say. again, that's the thing I've heard about ADHD people. As soon as you stick their head underwater, it's kind of like the equivalent of having those earrings, you know, the Ron's earbuds that you put in that kind of reduce the kind of background noise. And you've kind of got the mask on, haven't you? So you're quite blinkered, and so everything's kind of shut out, and you've kind of forced to focus on things. So it is. I find it a very calming kind of snorkeling and going underwater. And yeah, I think, you know, I bought my snorkeling mask, I think 35 years ago. I've still got the same one, and it's probably like the best piece of my best investment that I've ever had. So yeah, but yeah. So I guess my relationship with the ocean, that's a good question. I ask my students this sometimes, and I think I have one of awe, and which is, it's just, I can't believe how big it is and how deep it is and how old it is and how it's just constantly frisbeeing creatures at us as we discover more and more that are just completely like, you're what? This is like something out, even the most far-fetched sci-fi movie couldn't come up with it, and this thing exists on our planet. So I feel a lot of gratitude, a lot of respect for it, and I guess I feel, to a degree, a bit of pity for it in terms of like how we treat it as just a place to dump stuff or a place to take stuff from. So yeah, I feel I have a lot of different emotions attached to it. So yeah.
Mm. Let's talk about this thing you said earlier about your, let's call it the test of conferences, like you sitting in a room being read to. In theory, I would assume that you go to conferences that touch on your interests, where you're like,
Mm.
I want to listen to this. What makes it so boring? What makes it so annoying for you?
I think that there's a lot of things, and I could rant forever about the format of the academic conference. But I think it's essentially something that we've inherited from the Victorian era, where there's this person stood on the stage who is the most knowledgeable person in the room. Everyone else isn't as clever as them, and so they just have to sit there and be spoken at. And I think that fundamentally it's a very passive way of engaging with research, with science, with other people. Fundamentally, like, the hard part is getting everyone into the same space at the same time, and you've done that. And instead of asking people, well, what do you want to know about? Or what skills do I want to learn? What skills can I offer? What is my expertise? There's nothing put in place to facilitate that at all. It's all just like, oh, okay, I went to see your 10-minute talk. It was really boring because you're a researcher. No one's taught you how to present. You've made this hideous PowerPoint just full of graphs because you're a little bit nervous, because you've got imposter syndrome. And you're like, well, if I put extra graphs in, it's going to make me look clever. And then you just speak at everyone, and then you've got to hope that someone kind of comes up at the end and goes, oh, that was interesting, shall we grab a beer? And it's just such a strange way of doing things. So I'd really like conferences to help attendees move from being like a passive recipient of information to an active member of the community that wants to contribute and learn from each other. So yeah, that's there. I'll get that. That's my kind of like, come on, conference organizers, sort it out. Yeah.
And you basically just delivered a masterclass in how to communicate science. You published a video, and by the time we record this, which is the 2nd of April, it has more than 1 million views on orcas, on a very specific topic. Um, do you think people can learn to communicate better, specifically in the science, specifically in the ocean space?
Yeah, definitely. I think science communication is as a real skill, and I think that a lot of researchers don't see the validity of it or don't see the purpose of it. I think a lot of the time it's framed around doing school talks. And one of the things I find frustrating is that if you ask a scientist, what is your main job? They'll be like, it's to research. But I'm like, okay, but then you need to get that research out there, like without realizing, like writing a scientific paper, that is science communication. And not all papers are equal. You can get papers that are written really, really badly. So you can't even find out like what the crucial piece of information is to take away from that. Similarly, like going to conferences, you're communicating what you found out to your community. So there's loads of areas where this is so important, and applying for grants and funds to do the research, trying to make people who are not aware of the importance of your science give you money to do it. So that is a really important skill. And then working within the ocean conservation field, you want the research to then be put into government policy and laws. So being able to communicate that to government is a really important skill. And these are things that are always just seen as fluffy extras, or I don't need to do that, or it's the job of the comms department or something. So I find that kind of frustrating in itself, that science communication is kind of seen as just as this thing that you don't really need to worry about. So I think that's science communication in general. And I think within the ocean context, I think because most people who research the ocean are looking at it from what is happening to it in terms of climate change or overfishing, biodiversity loss, or pollution, something like that. So typically what ends up happening is we always preach to the converted. We come from this kind of environmentalist background, and so we put on events that only people who are interested in ocean or interested in the environment, interested in the interest in conservation come along to. So I think we need to get much better at speaking to different audiences, and audiences that don't necessarily agree with us, or audiences that don't naturally think that the ocean is important. So that's one of the things I try quite hard to do, is not to shoot the fish in the barrel, but to try and speak to people who are who wouldn't maybe easily seek out that ocean content.
I'm gonna give you my diagnosis of what I learned so far. I mean, this is now my 20th conversation, I would say, with a marine biologist. I read a couple of books by now. I'm an amateur in this field, and the first thing that I basically learn is you should not look at the world from an Anthropocene angle, so the human in the center. And I think this is very hard for someone that is not part of that community, because we are by nature quite egoistic and think about ourselves, right? And where my thing is, well, I understand that from a scientific background, but to connect to a human, you also have to explain what the impact on themselves is, right? Would you agree with that, or is that a completely wild, idiotic thought from my
Well,
side?
no. Well, I think there's this idea of interdependence, and that everything is related to everything on Earth. Like every single different species was able to evolve because it occupies a very specific role in a very specific ecological niche. And I think there's this idea that human beings are somehow separate from nature. We are no longer, we're so clever that we don't have any, we don't respond to our external environment anymore. That actually we're separate to it. We build these cities that aren't nature. And I think we need to really, without getting like really hippie about it, but like think about that we are part of the ecosystem, the community on this planet. And by getting rid of something or doing something over here, it has massive knock-on effects that influence us. I think there was a really interesting article which I read this year that really highlighted how we are, how much humans respond to their environment outside. And it was an article in the New Yorker, and it was about this organization that paints murals in areas with high crime rates. And they found in areas where they paint a mural, the murder rate goes down by 30%. And because most of the time, most murders aren't premeditated, they're just things that happen randomly. And so there's this idea, okay, if you're a human and you're in this horrible built-up environment with no greenery, nothing to bounce off of, you respond to that environment. Whereas if you're there and there's a picture, like a nice, beautiful picture, then just that subconsciously stops people from killing each other. So I was like, so we really do respond to things that are, in our external environment. And I think I'm seeing it much more and more, like that just because you live in a city, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have access to green space. You shouldn't have access to clean air and clean water. And so I think there's been, a big change in town planning and looking at ways that we can build healthy lifestyles into every day. So, yeah. So I think, yeah, I'm excited to see what the cities of the future look like as we move away from like things that are entirely based around the car, and to think about actually, let's base it around the humans that are living there. So,
And how do we become part of that ecosystem again, really?
yeah.
It's your job today to basically make science more accessible, I would say, to some degree. Do you think everyone in the scientific community, if they really try, can become a good communicator of their own science?
I think that when people think of a science communicator, they think of like a very kind of loud, extrovert person on stage. I mean, the caricature I always have in my head is someone in a tie-dye lab coat who is blowing up balloons full of hydrogen and things like that to make them just like that chemistry guy. And I think it's important to recognize that that there's lots of different personalities and lots of different types of skills out there. So just because you aren't this big, loud show-off person, it doesn't mean that the only form of science communication that you can do is standing on stage, kind of being loud and extrovert. I think, like as I explained before, science communication comes in so many different forms that it's essentially having an awareness of the audience and who you're speaking to, like what their values are, what their level of scientific literacy is, what they're interested in, and taking the science that you've got and reshaping it and refocusing it so it appeals to that group. And that can be through written word, it can be through policy documents, it can be through scientific papers, it can be through loads and loads of different mechanisms. So I like to think that every scientist could become an amazing science communicator in their own way, in a way that resonates with their own personality, with their own skills, and the things that they feel comfortable doing. So
we already talked about what you think the cardinal sins are, these overloaded PowerPoint slides and just plain boring. At the same time, at these conferences, you do mostly speak to a scientific audience, right? But how would you wish people adjust their message to make it resonate more?
well, I think for a start, I went to the Ocean Science meeting in Portland, and there was a really interesting experiment that we did. There was a science communication session, and they gave everyone a piece of paper, and you had to write down 3 words that were particular to your research on the piece of paper. And then you screwed up the piece of paper and you threw them all around the room. And that for 30 seconds, then everyone had to grab one. There was maybe like 150 people in the room. And then they opened all the paper up, and then they said, okay, hands up if you understand all 3 words on the paper, and 5 people out of 150 put their hand up. And this is within ocean science. So that for me was a like massive like wake up call that even within ocean science, there's so much niche jargon, that this expectation that you can just get on stage and one ocean scientist working in one field can speak to another one, and the assumption that they will understand those words, I think for me, that really highlighted the importance of having some audience awareness and bringing an audience with you and really thinking about who you're speaking to. I think from communicating to values, I think this is really interesting. We've been doing some work around the Schwartz, like different human values, which is a really interesting piece of social science that kind of shows how what makes people tick and what the things are important to different people. So broadly speaking, you can clump people into 3 different groups. And the first group I call traditionalists. And so these are, my house is my castle. They're very patriotic. They're very family orientated. They are fearful of change. They don't like to take risk. They respect authority. And so I guess this group typically you see allied with the MAGA movement. This is the group within the UK that caused Brexit, kind of pushed that through. And they have this really strong set of traditional values. And right now, if you were to poll people in the UK, about 2/3 of the people in the UK would fall into that category. So the second category are called possessors, and these are people that are really driven by status, by big or ostentatious shows of wealth. They want to be seen to be successful. They care a lot about what their peer group thinks of them. These are people that really prescribe to celebrity culture, big brands, and they kind of want to be seen to be really successful. They're normally really early adopters of new technologies and gadgetry, and they also don't like being told that they have to stop doing something or that they're doing something wrong. So broadly speaking, this group are Tesla owners. Again, I'm not being disparaging of this, but you think about it, like they were like, oh yeah, Tesla car, I want the latest gadgets. It's a big kind of cool, car that you can show off, drive around. Yeah, I'm like, and
it's probably the Tesla owners with a bumper sticker.
Yeah,
FTKELN.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I bought this before he went to go there. Yeah.
But they're so scared about their reputation.
And and again, if you polled the UK, about 1/4 of the people in the UK would be in that category right now. If you were to poll China, about 2/3 of China would come into that category, as like we've got this reduction in communism, and it's kind of become more like a more liberal version of it, and people are allowed to have they're allowed to own things and be successful after the very restrictive kind of Chairman Mao years. That generation now is like, oh my God, this is incredible. I can own all this stuff. And so that's what we're seeing so it's different societies and different countries go around different amounts. And then the third group, which I call altruists, these are like the tree-hugging hippies. These are the people who think big and want to live in a world full of care and love, and they are happy to do jobs which pay badly, but are like aligned with their values. Like, I'm happy to take a hit on my wages because I feel like I'm doing something that's beneficial to the world. So this would be like nurses or teachers and people like that. And this is where most people, I would say, this is where most academics are. This is where most environmentalists are. And currently in the UK, about 5% of people would fall in that category. So the idea is that when you're an academic or an environmentalist and you want to go and speak to the person on the street, whatever that person would be like, the assumption is that they also care about the environment. They also care about the ocean and they care about climate change. And they do, but not as much as these other things. So being able to target your message and understand where these different people are coming from and what these different values are, these drivers in their life, I think is really, really important. And especially as we're seeing, the world is getting much more and more polarized, I think being able to understand different people and their drivers is more important than ever.
Mm.
And like each of these different groups like looks at each other with just complete I don't understand. And it's quite interesting in my family because my dad would be in the first category, my sister and her family would be in the second category, and I'm in the third. And so each of us kind of doesn't really understand each other. So previously at the Christmas dinner table, it caused these big arguments. And now I'm pleased that I feel I'm able to understand their motivations, their drivers a bit more, and the arguments around the dinner table have now massively come down as a result of this.
Is that because of your own reflection or because they also reflected on this and you talked about it?
I think I did get them to. There's a quiz you can do online that tells you like which group you fall into, and I got them to do that, and they were like, "Yes, what's wrong with that?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm not picking a hole in what you are, but I'm just trying to like use it as a to show like how different we all are, and actually, I know that I struggle to respect where you're coming from, but I'm trying to, and I need you to do the same back to me," which I feel like they're less willing to do now.
And when you started scripting this Orca video with 1 million views or more than 1 million views, which target group did you have in mind?
Well, I knew it was going out on the New Scientist YouTube channel, and I think so. Fundamentally, you've automatically got a self-selecting audience there, people who are into science. And I think what I noticed about the Orca content that was online already is it was very, very kind of clickbaity, and it was very, oh yeah, orcas attack boats, they're taking down the millionaires, man, yeah. And there was all of these kind of theories from all over the place. And so when this was kind of presented to me as like, we've done a lot of research around this, are you able to put this script together? I was like, this is a fantastic opportunity to take those elements of clickbaity, not very rigorous journalism that is all over the internet, bring that all into one place, interrogate it, and then put it out through a reputable science channel. And I think that combination is what has driven its success, because it's something that people are really interested in. It's something that everyone reckons that they've got their own theory and their own insight and an anecdote that someone told them this. But paying kind of credence to those different anecdotes, those different theories, and then exploring them through like a rigorous scientific lens, I think has meant that you're able to have the entertainment value and that kind of, oh, well, let's explore this. But it's also a bit of a microcosm of the scientific process. Like there's theories all over the place. So let's actually explore each one of those theories. Let's talk to these different experts. Let's unpack these different theories and see how much validity there is to each of them.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Now, I mean, this is something that we discussed in our prep call for this episode. I think that whales also have something going for them, right? What we just had this stranded humpback whale here in Germany, and there's this big podcast in Germany, and even they picked it up. It was on every single news page, and the funniest thing I saw was like in this podcast, the guy says like, yeah, well, everybody was standing on the pier chewing on their fish sandwich. It's like, oh my God, I hope the whale makes it. So uh, while we have no issue consuming fish, consuming pigs or whatever, we do feel and empathize with the whale. So it's always a great hook also to get people into it. I don't want to get into why we have this dissonance, but when I ask you, you worked on Plankton,
Mm.
and I told you, it's like, well, why don't we do a masterclass on how to be entertaining about science? And we do that at the example of Plankton. You said I wouldn't start with a Plankton. How would you start?
Well, I think, well, I first got into running Incredible Oceans and doing what I do through an event called Whale Fest. And so Whale Fest happened in Brighton, I think from 2011 through to 2016, ran for 5 years. And it just grew and grew and grew until the last one that happened over 10 years ago. When it happened, it was the largest ocean festival on earth. It was 15,000 people a day attended it. And that was primarily driven from the documentary Blackfish, and it was around anti-captivity. So this idea of trying to get people to recognize that these are intelligent animals with a strict, very complex social hierarchies, and taking them out of natural environment and putting them in a swimming pool and getting them to jump through hoops for fish, was degrading and just very morally wrong.
Mm,
So I got into it through that, and I realized that within marine conservation there is a subdivision of like just total whale nerds that are people who are just so into them. And I was like, okay, I find whales kind of interesting, but they're I think a really useful poster poster animal to talk about broader marine issues and why we how we treat the ocean, talking about ideas around interdependence and evolution, just so much different. You can Every ocean topic you can cover from a whale perspective. And I think because whales are big and charismatic, and there's a bit like loads of cultural references, there's loads of mythology around them. I think they're a creature that people are familiar with, that just from their sheer size, there's like an awe to them. So I think trying to get people interested in whales is kind of easy. Trying to get people to appreciate the intricacies of plankton, I think, is much harder. And I think one of the important things about doing science communication is to constantly challenge yourself and to try out new ideas and see if, like, what's the most obscure thing I could get a room of children to care about, or if I were to do a talk at a music festival, what just random thing can I get people to be like, whoa, that's crazy, I didn't know that. So I think essentially I started doing plankton talks because when I was doing my PhD research, I was going here, there and everywhere talking about whales, and my university was like, you don't study whales. If you're going to be going here, there and everywhere and doing talks, you kind of need to do it about plankton. And I was like, okay. And the next talk I had booked was in Belfast, where I was going to be speaking to 2,000 primary school children. And I was like, I went to the organizers, hi, I know I'm supposed to be talking about whales, but I'm actually going to talk about plankton. And they were like, okay. And so I was like, okay, I'm confident I can make plankton interesting. So yeah, and so that's kind of how it started.
How did you then make Plankton interesting?
Well, I think I obviously the easy, I could bring some whales into it because whales eat krill, which is a form of zooplankton. So that was the easy kind of adjacent thing there. And you could talk about it in terms of marine food chains and marine food webs and things like that. But I mean, if you talk to people about plankton and you ask them, like, what do you know? Most people know it's small, whales eat it, and there's one in SpongeBob. and that's it. Those are their plankton
Which is a great
facts.
hook for primary school kids.
Exactly. Like there's an actual famous plankton out there, which is pretty cool.
You never had a chance to defeat me, fool!
But yeah, it's so ridiculously important. So I studied phytoplankton, which are the plants, and these things are 50 microns in diameter approximately, so about the same thickness as the human hair, and they produce up to 80% of the oxygen that we breathe. So when we talk about oxygen in the atmosphere and the lungs of our planet, it's always the Amazon rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. But the ocean, because it's full of phytoplankton, just pumping out oxygen into the atmosphere, but also crucially, because they're photosynthesizing, they're taking carbon dioxide out the atmosphere, locking it into their structure. As they die, they then sink into the deep ocean and take that carbon with them. So the current estimate is about a quarter of the excess carbon dioxide that we put in the atmosphere has ended up in the ocean because of processes like photosynthesis of plankton.
That is insane.
But the other cool fact is, you could be in the middle of North America, like 2 days drive from the sea, and you could just breathe in, and that is your link to the ocean, because 80% of that breath, that oxygen that's keeping you alive, is from the ocean. So it doesn't matter where you go on the planet, every breath gives you that link to it, which I think is beautifully poetic.
And then it doesn't matter if you're a traditionalist, a possessor, or I forgot what the thing.
An altruist.
Altruist.
Yeah.
We all need to breathe. We all need oxygen, which is our connection back to the ocean. But coming back to the plankton, I didn't know that there's this distinction between, or I didn't know that it can be both a plant and an animal.
Yeah, and bacteria and viruses. So essentially,
Well, what is a plankton then in the first place? If
Well,
we can't say.
it's a bit of a weird scientific definition. It comes from the Greek word planktos, which means to drift. And essentially, it is an organism that is so small it is unable to swim against a prevailing current. So technically, jellyfish are plankton because they don't swim against currents. They have to kind of go where the currents take them. So I think what's interesting, so you've got these tiny plants that float around, and those are eaten, those are the phytoplankton. Those are then eaten by zooplankton, which are the small animals. And so you get some zooplankton will be plankton for their entire lives, and some will only be plankton for a part of their life cycle. So there'll be a plankton while they're babies, like fish eggs are plankton, baby fish are plankton, and then eventually they grow big enough and they move out of the plankton and they become nekton, which is the opposite, which means they can swim against currents. And so what we found is that you find a plankton biologist has described a species that they found under a microscope, and then another marine biologist will have described the fully grown creature and given it a different name. So there's some animals in the ocean which we've given two names to, and so sometimes they go, well, what does this turn into? And you put it in a tank, in a laboratory to see what it grows into, and it dies or whatever. So you don't know what it becomes. And there's other creatures that we know what the fully formed adult looks like, but we don't know what the juveniles look like. So it's only now with DNA sampling that we've been able to kind of link things up from the microscopic world to the macroscopic world.
Is there one that anyone would know?
I'm trying to think. I think, it's just crazy. One of the ones I think is really interesting is if you look at barnacles. So like barnacles, people
Back to the whale, huh?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, barnacles are on whales, but they're on rocks. So most people are like, oh yeah, it's just a thing on a rock. But they swim, and they have little devil's horns, and they swim, and then they find a rock that they want to live on forever, and then they molt, and then they start taking like basically chalk that is dissolved in the ocean, and they make their carapace out of it. And then they have that little top which opens up, and then they put their legs out, which are their filter feeders, and they eat. And so, yeah, you would never think.
Science fiction.
Yeah. I mean, the goose barnacle is a really good example of this, in that we never saw baby geese because they migrated. So because goose barnacles have that long neck and they have that kind of end on them like that, they're called goose barnacles because people thought that they were what geese grew into. Or so they turned into geese. So yeah, so there are some wonderful things. Eels as well. Like eels were a complete, like, what is going on here? Because every time you dissect an eel in the river, it has no reproductive organs. And so they were like, oh, okay, this is, so everyone thought earthworms and eels were kind of the same thing. And then they realized that actually eels, when they mate, they they go through this process where they get rid of their digestive system and replace it with the reproductive system. And then they swim out of the freshwater river into the North Atlantic Ocean. They all coordinate to meet in the Sargasso Sea, which is kind of in the North Atlantic, but slightly closer to the Caribbean. They basically have a big orgy. They all die, and then their babies work their way back to the rivers. And it's like, what? This is insane. So yeah, eel biology as well. That's crazy.
We don't need to fly to Mars to discover aliens. So we have them.
I should also say I need to pay credence to, I kind of simplified that kind of phytoplankton plant, zooplankton animal thing. But there's a whole group of plankton which we call mixotrophs, which are kind of like zooplankton that can photosynthesize or phytoplankton that can eat stuff. And like kind of halfway between a plant and an animal. Like I call them, when I go into schools, I call them planimals. And yeah, so these, like, one of my favorite plankton is a mixotroph. It's called Mesodinium, and it's a tiny cell. And when it's made, when the cell is created, it can't photosynthesize. So it eats another cell, dissolves it, and steals the chloroplasts, which are responsible for the photosynthesis. So then it can photosynthesize. And then there's another species called Dinophysis, which eats that and then steals the chloroplast. So by that point, they're third-hand kind of organelles that they've traded up through the cells. You're like, what? This is the equivalent is like a human going outside and eating a lettuce, and then our skin becoming slightly greener, and then we can just stand outside in the sun and make our own sugar.
And then be eaten by, I don't know, an elephant or
Yeah, like an orca, get eaten by an orca, and then the orca can do the same. Yeah. So it's incredible.
The ocean is full of wonder, and I, coming back to the beginning of the conversation, can now more and more understand why you chose this as an ecosystem, because there's so much happening that you can focus on, right? And where you can live your curiosity.
Yeah, well, I think I randomly ended up doing my PhD in the civil engineering department because of the link between kind of ocean physics and mixing and water quality, and how that can basically, my research can be applied to reservoirs to stop plankton blooms happening in them. So everyone else in my office was just like a civil engineer, and I think every day I was just like reading these scientific papers and being like, oh my god, guys, do you know the plankton can do this? And they were just like, yeah, shut up, mate. And but I was confident that it was exciting enough that I could turn this into a school talk. So, and I did. So there we go.
I wish you'd be sitting next to me in the office.
You'd be like, mate, I need to get on with some work. Stop talking to me.
Tell me more. I want to bring one thing up, talking about plankton, and we talk about these hooks that are interesting to people. We talk after there was this show on Netflix coming out called The Plastic Detox. And people are getting increasingly worried about the effects of microplastic. It has or more specifically, the chemicals within
Mm.
microplastics in our body. And I do think plankton plays an important role there, because I heard that microplastic in the ocean is kind of interrupting the food chain on that level. Or
Mm.
do you know anything about that? And
Well, I mean, it's causing so many problems. It's one of these ones where it's a bit like it when you inhabit the world of the ocean, it's like always bad news. And I think a big part of it is learning how to deal and cope with the constant bad news that you're getting, and trying to deal with the frustration on inaction, like just why governments aren't putting stuff in place to do this. I think so. One of the pieces of research which is slowly coming out is how nanoplastics, which are smaller than microplastics, can interact with plankton cells and plants, like more broadly. So, and it can reduce their photosynthetic efficiency by 50%. So,
given that it's responsible for roughly 8% of our oxygen.
So this is not only oxygen, but this is also like food crops as well. So we're at a time when climate change is making weather patterns more unpredictable. We've got a growing population that needs feeding, and we've got so much plastic everywhere that we're also impeding the growth rate of our own crops because of it. So there's that kind of, I guess, anthropomorphic, anthrocentric view of looking at things. But there's loads of other issues. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about plankton taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So typically what happens is the plankton cells, the phytoplankton cells, can die and sink into the deep ocean, but they can also get eaten by the zooplankton. And then the zooplankton can then poop, and their fecal pellets come out, and then they sink into the deep ocean. So all of these things are methods for carbon sequestration and sinking. And by introducing microplastics into the food chain, the problem that you have is that creatures get full stomachs, and they eat things that have no nutritional value. So their stomachs are full of something that doesn't do anything for them. So this is also having massive impacts on the food chain, and the amount of energy that's flowing up it into the different levels around it. There's a really interesting film by a guy called Chris Jordan. It's called Albatross, and he's made it available for free on his website. And it basically follows an albatross colony on an island called Midway, which is in the middle of the Pacific, thousands of kilometers from land. And these albatross parents come together and they raise their chicks, and then the parents take it in turns to go and get food. And the parents come back with stomachs full of plastic, and then they feed it to the chick. So from the parents' point of view, oh, I've done a great job, I've fed the chick. The parents leave, and then the chicks then have to, normally what they would do is they regurgitate their stomach contents, like any undigestible bits of bones and hair and things like that. And then they're light enough to fledge, to fly away and leave the island. But because their bellies are completely full of plastic, A, they're not strong enough, they haven't got the nutrients to leave, but they also can't regurgitate it. It's stuck in their stomachs. So they're too heavy and they can't take off. So about a third of the albatross chicks die, and then they rot away, and then the plastic is there on this island just to continue that cycle. So it's really disrupting natural food webs and natural patterns in all kinds of different ways, which is really worrying. And so much of the world's protein, so much of the food that we, how humanity feeds itself, comes from the ocean. So trying to have meaningful policies in place that get rid of this plastic. I mean, people can't imagine a life without it. It didn't really exist when I was a kid, 40 years ago. the world functioned, people ate food. People, it's not like everyone. So it's how has this crept up on us? And this idea of anything should be a disposable fork, a disposable cup. There is no, nothing is thrown away. Everything that we've ever made is still on the planet unless it's incinerated, So yeah, it's
I find that very interesting framing. And coming back to these three target groups, right? I think with the 5% of altruists, that would immediately resonate. It's like, hey, there's an albatross that's dying.
mm,
I'm not sure if the traditionalist would say it's like, or a traditionalist where there's no albatross present and they don't care if they were ever there would say it's like, yeah, well, so what? Or the possessionist,
the possessors,
the possessors. Maybe if it's currently on vogue on social media to be pro-environment, they would say, like, oh my God, we have to rescue the albatross. How do we make these stories resonate with the vast majority? Because you said, right, the altruists are 5%.
Yeah. So I guess knowing that your listeners who will choose to listen to this will be kind of pro-environmental, they'll click, oh, an ocean talk. So the albatross is probably going to work with the listeners. In terms of the traditionalists, you really have to look at ideas around food security and are we going to be able to eat the food that we want? And I think a big part of the problem, like why so much of our food comes wrapped in plastic, is because we're so used to buying food, like having avocados all year, having things covered in plastic to help keep them in good condition as we're buying things from other countries. So I think there's a big argument there for buying local and supporting local farmers, buying seasonally as well, and which also feeds into the, it's healthier for you angle. But I think being able to, for countries to be more self-sufficient right now, this is middle of this Iran, US, Israel war. And I think everyone has been disrupted by the reduction in oil. Even though most of that oil is going to Asia, we're feeling the pinch globally. And so I think there's a renewed interest in self-sufficiency and people, like countries, being able to stand on their own 2 feet to a degree. And so a really easy way to do that is through food security and supporting your local economy, supporting local industry, supporting local farmers, which all of that reduces the need for plastic in supermarkets because you're cutting the time down between the point that it's picked to the point that it's eaten. So that, for me, that's a really easy way to kind of tick the box in terms of traditionalists. I think also they tend to respond quite well to the economy and ideas around the economy. And so looking at, okay, the cost that this is to tourism, the cost that this is to the fishing industry from having so much plastic in the ocean and the reduction in that. I think those ideas and the framing of the environmental message in those ways, those things that traditionally resonate with kind of more maybe like right-wing populist rhetoric, that those ideas to kind of show that yes, it's an environmental issue that typically has been seen as like a left-wing woke issue. But these environmental issues, because humans are part of the environment, the economy is there because we extract things from the environment. So it's all related. You can't have the economy without the environment. You can't have health. You can't have self-sufficiency without looking after the environment. In terms of the possessors, you tend to find that they are quite health conscious as well. So looking at and kind of exploring, like we talked about, humans are ingesting so much plastic now, passively. I mean, one of my mind-blowing things was I have this plankton counting machine where I could scoop up my water and pour it in the top, and every time a particle was like passed through a laser, it counted it. And the guy who showed me how to use the machine went, "You ever put bottled water through it?" And I was like, "No." He went, "Check this out." And we just went to the supermarket and we got a bottle of water, poured it through, and in every milliliter there was 300,000 plastic ribbons. And ever since I saw that, I think I do not drink anything from a plastic bottle anymore. I'm like, whoa, okay. And you realize that, like, yeah, there's so much plastic everywhere. And, you know, skeptics will say, well, so what? It just passes through us, like, whatever. And that, yeah. Yeah.
I just recently heard that 1/200th of our brain by now is plastic. And
Yeah.
I even if science figures out this doesn't do anything to you, it still feels wrong to me. They're still worried about what's in our body, what's in our blood, like will it clog and all that, and then people don't care if it's full of plastic. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. I mean, one of the reasons that it's so difficult to work out the health effect on humans is because there's no control group.
No.
Like when we found out that smoking caused cancer, we had non-smokers that we could compare and contrast, and that we could see this. But there's no population on the planet that hasn't ingested vast quantities of plastic now. So how do you monitor that? You know, it's a really difficult one to kind of to see and to tease apart what other factors might be contributing to things. But I mean, yeah, there's so much evidence already that shows it's affecting fertility, it's affecting like the immune system. Like, yeah, so much. So yeah.
It's interesting because I think if we would now listen to this episode backwards, we would have the perfect entry point always to come back to the plankton for multiple different target groups, because it all somewhere starts then in the ocean. Like you can track these food chains back to the microorganisms that are by now morphing with plastic. And I think this was a masterclass in disguise on how to communicate science to different audiences. So Russell, I really, really want to thank you for that. It's been highly entertaining, educating for me. Maybe if someone listened to this point, let's give it away to you also to promote what you do in your day-to-day life, where people can find you, how you can help people.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for having us on. And yeah, if you check out my website, which is incredibleoceans.org. So that is the marine education and communications, like a non-profit that I run. We've been going for about 10 years. And yeah, as well as kind of taking the ocean into spaces where people might not care about it. So we do a lot of events and things, but we also do a lot of science communication training for people who want to communicate environmental issues to different audiences. So
maybe we highlight once more why it is important that scientists properly communicate what they do.
I think fundamentally, scientists are there to communicate their research. Research that isn't communicated has no use to anyone. Every scientist wants their papers to be read, to be acted upon, for their research to get into spaces where it's needed the most, and to people to learn from it. So communication is central to writing good papers, to giving good conference talks, to speaking to policymakers, to speaking to funding agencies, grant givers, to speaking to different stakeholders. And being able to do that effectively means that as a scientist, you are doing your job more effectively. So,
and this is an open invitation. If any ocean scientist is listening to this, you're happy to come on the show, talk about your science. I will ask amateur questions to you, and hopefully by that make it understandable to a broader audience. Before that, work with Russell so we have a better episode. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Brilliant. Thanks for having us on.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and our Instagram. where the ocean meets.